I wrote a lot about Trump's mentor, Roy Cohn, who was, among other things, the general counsel to McCarthy during the McCarthy hearings. He was also, a New York City lawyer that represented a lot of unsavory figures, including some tied to organized crime, and also had the ear of Ronald Reagan and top politicians in the United States and sort of bridged a variety of worlds. And he very much essentially taught Trump
A hidden system of power operates above the law, unchanged, unchallenged, and passed down through generations.
He essentially taught Trump the art of the deal. And, a lot of his close associates, like the Pope family, were very politically connected, also connected to organized crime, arguably, but were very much in the business of making backroom deals. Some people just are protected and above the law, almost inexplicably. And, as I point out in my book, it's a lot of the same actors over and over again, the same institutions. And you can see when one institution crumbles, another one pops up in its place. So as an example in the book, I talk a lot about the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, BCCI, that implodes in 1991. It's covered up by William Barr when he was Attorney General, who covered up Iran-Contra, the Promise software scandal, and BCCI, all as being Attorney General, and later would return to kind of do that and for Trump 1 when he was, Attorney General again. But after BCCI implodes, a lot of their portfolio of, organized crime and shady interests goes to the banks that are sort of related to this guy named Edmund Safra. And Edmund Safra dies in his home, supposedly the story is very bizarre, but from arson allegedly set by his American nurse because she wanted to set a fire and then save him from it, but then didn't save him from it. It's fine. Anyway, he was very good friends with Robert Maxwell and a lot of these figures that pop up all over the place in the Epstein case. And then who absorbs his banks? HSBC. They basically take those over, and then HSBC gets exposed. I forget, I think that it wasn't the Panama Papers, but it was like one of those consortium of journalists that published these leaks, basically revealed a lot of prominent people that were part of these HSBC Swiss accounts that had been inherited from Safra. Epstein was one of them. Some associates of Epstein, like Flavio Briatore, are there, but also, HSBC was laundering money for drug cartels. And who didn't go after them when they were in charge of the Bank of England? Mark Carney, who is now Prime Minister of Canada.
At this point, it's important to pause, not to focus on any single person, but to understand the pattern that keeps repeating. When figures like this appear in these stories, it's tempting to ask whether they're corrupt, compromised, or acting in bad faith. But that question misses the larger point. Individuals move through these systems the way current moves through a circuit. The structure determines the outcome long before any one person enters the frame. What matters is where power is allowed to concentrate, who is trusted to manage it, and how rarely those positions are disrupted. Titles change. Governments rotate, but the underlying networks remain remarkably stable. That stability isn't accidental. It's the result of institutions designed to absorb risk, deflect blame, and maintain continuity, especially when scrutiny increases. So when new names surface, they don't signal a break in the system. They signal that the system is functioning exactly as intended.
And while he was head of the Bank of England, there's pictures of him hanging out with Ghislaine. Whose, father Robert Maxwell was banked by Safra, among other things. Ghislaine thinks it was rogue Mossad agents and Sicilian mafia hitmen that killed him, came together. It's kind of funny because that's kind of the thesis of my book. It's like the National Crime Syndicate, which was the Italian mafia, their New York branch, and later their head got deported to Italy and sort of set up shop there. And then the Jewish mob that was headed by Meyer Lansky. And that basically this crime syndicate is the crime syndicate that teamed up with, the intelligence agencies, because this Operation Underworld, all of that, the formation of this nexus predates the founding of the State of Israel. And so a lot of these actors, and I note this in my book too, were involved with the arming of the Haganah and these paramilitary groups that later create Israel in 1948, and then help them set up their intelligence agencies. So that's sort of how you get all this overlap between, Mossad, Britain, CIA. It goes back to, the beginning of Israel's national security complex, really. Because, think about how these people operate. These people could not have gotten away with all of this as it wasn't for mazes of holding companies, shell company, Byzantine offshore banks, and all the other things that enable financial criminality in today's world. So obviously the connections are similarly going to be labyrinthian and Byzantine, but they are there. Like I pretty convincingly show in my book that there's a lot of baton passing going on between the generations. So like my book starts in the 40s and I follow a lot of these institutions and people through the years. So, I talk a lot about how Roy Cohn, who was Donald Trump's mentor, and how he passed a lot of things on to Trump, how a lot of people that were in Cohn's network got involved with Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell hired them when he came to the US, including figures like Robert Keith Gray that were PR executives on their face, but also tied to the CIA, involved in sex blackmail, close friends with William Casey, who was CIA director under Reagan, among other things, and how they, got involved with Maxwell's entry into New York City, which is how, mainly how Ghislaine got so enmeshed in New York society, and also, teamed up with Epstein in that same period of time. So, all of this matters, and these connections are significant because this baton passing shows that this is a generational thing. And in the case of Maxwell, Robert Maxwell's children, at least the ones that were close to him, because you have two that sort of splintered off from the larger Maxwell clan, but are very open that, after he died, they were trying to figure out how to rebuild his empire. It's important to keep in mind that, like, when the petrodollar system has been, the standard for keeping the dollar the global, or reserve currency, the U.S. has gone to war and killed millions of people to defend that. One of the likely motivations, obviously there's more than one, so that, there are cases where, the U.S. government, or rather U.S. empire, is willing to go to extreme lengths to defend the dollar. So the idea that they would just sit idly by and just let dollarization happen without having some sort of plan in the works, especially knowing that they couldn't keep this going indefinitely and that the world was going to move at some point to a post-oil economy. I think it's important to keep in mind that these people have been very serious and played very dirty and created insane instability just to keep the dollar the global reserve currency.
The hardest part of recognizing a system like this is accepting that it doesn't end with exposure. There's comfort in believing that if something is revealed loudly enough, it will be stopped. But systems built on continuity don't fear attention. They anticipate it. They survive by adapting, by shifting responsibility, and by ensuring that no single moment of outrage ever becomes sustained resistance. That's why change feels elusive. Not because nothing is wrong, but because the mechanisms that decide what matters are embedded far deeper than elections, scandals, or headlines. Power isn't just exercised, it's inherited, normalized, and quietly defended over time. Understanding this doesn't mean surrender, it means clarity. It means knowing that meaningful pressure doesn't come from chasing individual villains, but from questioning the structures that make them irrelevant. Because the most dangerous systems aren't the ones that hide in the shadows. They're the ones that convince us there's nothing left to question.